Can you start by stating your name and rank?
I'm Ken Chapman, Principal Keeper of Bull Point Lighthouse.
Where were you born?
I was born in Cornwall.
And what on earth made you become a lighthouse keeper in the first place?
Well, I was brought up very near lighthouses in Cornwall. I suppose it was just the natural thing to do.
And what lighthouses have you been on?
Well, I've actually worked on 29 different lighthouses.
Yeah.
Some for a short period of time and some for many years.
And what's the ones you've been on, roughly?
I've been on the Wolf Rock, Round Island, Skookum, the Great Ormes, the Needles, Pendine, twice, and this one, Bull Point.
And this is the one you've been on the longest stretch, is it?
It is now, yes.
On the Tower Rocks, the Wolf for instance, that's renowned for really rough weather and overdues. Have you experienced lots of that?
Yes, in my days, it was the days before the helicopter. We used to go by boat and, we used to go for 56 days at a time. It was nothing new to spend anywhere up to 100 days on the lighthouse before they got you off again.
So you did lots of overdues then?
Oh yes, we used to have an overdue more or less every relief.
Well, can you explain to those that might see this that don't know what a boat relief entails?
Well, with the Wolf Rock, it was a very unique relief simply because the lighthouse was so isolated that the actual crane that landed you on the landing was dismantled and stored inside of the lighthouse. So every time the boat came, it was about an hour's work building a crane before you could start to work. And the keepers were not allowed outside of the tower until the boat was actually moored to the buoy off the lighthouse. So you had to have really about 2 to 3 hours of more or less calm weather before they could work on the Wolf Rock, the ship.
So it was quite a dangerous place to be?
Oh, it was very dangerous, yes.
So could you get out much at all then?
No, you wouldn't allowed outside of the doors if there was no ship off the landing. You had to keep everything battened down until the ship arrived.
What sort of era are we talking about?
Well, we're talking up until 1972. In 1972, that was when they started helicopter relief from the Wolf. Before 1970, keepers used to go to the rocks for 56 days on the rock, followed by 28 days ashore. But in 1970, owing to a review by the Prices and Incomes Board, Trinity House dropped the times that keepers should spend on rocks from 56 days to 28 days on duty, followed by 28 days on leave.
What sort of things did you do other than your work on the lighthouse out to sea?
Well, on most of the rocks when I first joined the service, we used to do quite a lot of fishing. That depends which lighthouse that you're on. I mean, places like the Eddystone and the Wolf. We used to fish from the top of the lighthouse. On the Eddystone we used to fish with a kite, on the Wolf with a rod and line.
Yeah. Can you explain how this famous kite fishing was done?
Well, it was a very unique thing. I mean, first of all, they used to have about a quarter mile of line, the line going to the kite. Instead of a tail on the kite, they used to have the downward line, the one that went into the sea. That was usually the height of the tower. So you used to bait up the line, fly the kite off. There was different size kites for different types of wind. For a gale, you used to use a kite about maybe a foot tall. A day that was more or less flat calm, you used a kite about 8 feet tall. And just fly the kite away from the lighthouse. When it got 200 to 300 yards away, the weight of the line used to take the kite down so it hovered about a foot above the water. And say if, for instance, if the tower was 150 feet high, you had 150 foot of line in the water, so you were fishing 150 feet down. Once the fish got on the end of the line, the downward pull of the fish would make the kite soar up into the sky. And you'd catch fish up to 16, 17 pounds in weight like that. The real big fish.
And getting a fish back to the light, was that flown back?
Yes, and the kite used to fly it back. You'd pull it up, tap on the rail, and the keeper that was down in the kitchen, you'd pull the fish up towards the kitchen window, and you'd put it down out of the window and pull the fish in. I mean, some of the keepers, the older keepers, I mean, the chap that taught me, he could manoeuvre the kite, sail it the same as you'd sail a yacht. He would sail it into the wind. It's all to do with putting the line from you to the kite to one of the arms, back to the centre, then down into the water. They were very experienced kite fishermen.
And what sort of years was this?
Well, I think the kite fishing really started before the last war. I mean, I was taught how to fish with a kite in 1951, so it was long before that.
And was that just recognised sort of like a supplement to your food?
Yes, but well, you've got to realise that in the lighthouse service, there was no refrigerators or deep freezers on any lighthouse. The first refrigerator was about 1953, and that went to Round Island on a 6-month trial. And we worked off paraffin, but before that, keepers had to take most of the food out with them. Meat, they used to cut up into small pieces, cook it very slowly in a jam jar in the oven. After about 4 or 5 hours of very slow cooking, they'd take it out of the oven and seal it with dripping. It was help way, shall we say, of canning food. That's the way they kept their meat, and that meat would keep in a normal cold place for anywhere up to 56 days.
So was your diet sort of tin food in those days?
Well, the majority of it was tin food. I mean, the type of milk we used to use was condensed milk. I mean, this glorious milk marble did not come into being until the 60s. That was a marble. Then by the 70s you had the long life milk. But before that, all keepers had was condensed milk. So of course, in my early days in the service, rationing was still on.
Yeah.
But the keepers used to get a special allowance. I mean, we used to get what was called seaman's ration. And that was 3 times the allocation of the general public had.
So did you serve on any lighthouses through the war years?
Not through the war years. I didn't join the service until 1951. I joined in February 1951.
Storms on lighthouses. Can you describe what it's like in a Tower Rock in a storm?
Well, Tower Rock, I mean, the Tower Rocks that had the real storms were the ones off the Cornish coast. I mean, some of the waves that used to hit those lighthouses were anything up to 60 feet high. With that, when the actual wave hit the tower, it was like an explosion down below. The sea would go over the top of the lighthouse, and the lighthouse was shuttered. It used to move, so they say, about a foot on the top.
So quite dramatic.
Well, I mean, it's a thing you got used to. I mean, we took no notice of it. I mean, like the places like the Wolf Rock, I mean, there were actual rooms from about 2/3 of the way up the tower down to the base, where the shutters had never been off the windows. The big gunmetal shutters had been closed ever since the lighthouse was built.
Purely because of the sea?
Because of the seas that used to hit those lighthouses.
What about in those sort of years on Tower Rocks, when you did 2 months on, was there more camaraderie between the keepers then?
Oh yes, because everyone had to make their own amusement. I mean, there was no such things as televisions. I mean, so the keepers used to play darts or play cards in the evenings. back in those days, the keepers, when they used to feed, used to be one keeper that was the cook every day. So you would be the cook every third day. And the cook would, well, the first thing he'd do, he'd get up and have breakfast. The morning watchman used to make the breakfast for the 3 keepers. The keepers had breakfast together about 9 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, 2 of the keepers would go to work, and the 3rd keeper would be the cook of the day. He would clean up the kitchen and prepare the midday meal. 1 o'clock, the 3 keepers would meet up at the meal. The morning watchman would go to bed, and the other 2 keepers would wash the dishes and tidy up the kitchen again. In the afternoon, we would play darts, fishing. All depends on the weather if you fished. But they used to fish most days, simply because it was the only fresh food you really had.
Yeah. Those sort of days, it was paraffin vapour.
Yes, paraffin lamps, yes.
Can you explain what those are?
Well, a paraffin lamp was very much like a tilly lamp, only a lot bigger, and the mantle was the size of a grapefruit. The actual paraffin container, it held about 25 gallons of paraffin. Underneath that was a bigger container holding air. It was compressed air, but we never had no machines to pump it out. We used to pump the air pressure up by hand. You used to have to pump that up maybe 2-3 times a night just to keep the pressure up. That would force the paraffin, a mixture of paraffin and air, up to the actual burner. Bunsen tubes in the burner would keep the actual vaporizer red hot, and the paraffin turned to a gas and came out and burned as a gas in the mantle. Places like the Wolf Rock and Bishop Rock, longships, during a gale, the keepers used to sit with their light all night, simply because in a gale and the vibration of the tower, it used to break the mantles. So you would always be whipping on new mantles. Some nights you got through about a dozen mantles.
And that was even worse in the old foghorn days, wasn't it?
Oh yes. I mean, what with the changing the mantles and having to wind up the clock to keep the lens revolving, you found plenty to do during the watches.
Explosive foghorns, you've seen a few.
Well, I've seen 2 types of explosive foghorns. I'm one of the very few keepers that have seen both types. The type on the rocks was an arm that you wound up above the tower. You put 2 charges on, a 4-ounce tonite charge. You had the charges and the detonators. You put a detonator in the charge, wound it up to the top of the lighthouse, and in the actual lantern you had a clock. If the fog signal, we say, sent 1 explosive charge off every 5 minutes, every 5 minutes this clock used to ring a bell. When the bell rang, you pressed the plunger, and that would set the explosive charge off. Now the other unique fog signal, there used to be 2 at one time in the service. There was one at Lynmouth Foreland, one at Lundy South. That had a magazine that would hold enough charges for 4 hours. And they had an endless chain. On the chain was hooks that used to pick the charges up out of the magazine, take them up to the end of the arm and fire them. But unfortunately, the one on Lundy, in a gale, the actual charge on the end of the arm exploded, but it had blown back and it exploded the second one. That one exploded the third one, and so on, and the complete fog signal blew up. But the one at Lynmouth, I mean, once it was working, we kept well away from it. We used to put 4 hours of charges in and just leave it. If fog cleared before the 4 hours was up, you had to fire off every charge that was in the magazine. So you could guarantee at Lynmouth, whenever we started for fog, we sounded for at least 4 hours.
So in those sort of days, the keeper's work was quite hard, wasn't it?
Oh yes, I mean, back in those days, I mean, keepers were expected to be the labourers for the mechanics when they came to the lighthouse. And you always used to be assisting the mechanics to strip engines, you had to clean out your water tanks and lime wash them every year. The engine room was washed and polished every day. The lens was polished once a week, and you always found plenty to do. And of course, if you were unfortunate enough to get snow, you had to keep your lantern clear of snow, so you'd spend the whole night out on the gallery, more or less, wiping the snow off the glazing. But all that's long past.
What's your favourite station been, if you ever had one?
I suppose looking back over it, I mean, my favourite station I had a fancy for was the Rolf Rock.
Yeah. Cause that
I mean, when I first went there, I wasn't all that keen to go, but you got to like the place once you were there.
Was that a proud day for you?
Yes, it was, you know.
Did you get to go and get it, or?
Yes, we had it presented by the Lord Lieutenant of Devon on the 13th of May at Exeter.
Yeah.
What makes it, in a way, unique, it's the last BEM that will ever be presented because of Mr. Major's change in the medal system and everything. And the one at Exeter happened to be the last presentation ever held by a Lord Lieutenant.
And how far off retirement are you now then?
Well, I've got another 2 years yet.
And you'll see it out on this station?
I shall see it out on the station.
Any
I mean,
regrets?
really and truly, this lighthouse and myself, we're due to retire at the same time.
Oh. Any regrets being a keeper then?
No, I've enjoyed every part of it. Every part of every station I've been to.
You must have met some nice old characters in your time.
Oh yes, there are many characters. I mean, old keepers. All the old keepers were characters of some sort. We've had some keepers on places like the Tower Rocks, where two of the keepers were sitting up in the kitchen, about 100 feet up from the sea, hear a tap on the window, and the other keeper would come down by rope on the outside.
Not just for fun?
Oh yes, yes. I mean, I've had these tales passed on to me by other keepers, older keepers, you know, that seemed as each generation got more reserved.
Yeah.
Seemed that the wild keepers were more or less around in the 30s. I mean, every keeper back in those days were legends.
Can you remember any old stories?
Oh, I can remember one keeper, man, they used to call him Mad Hicks. He used to go on the roof of the Tower Rocks and do handstands.
Thanks very much for your assistance, Ken, and I wish you very well in the future in your retirement.
Oh, right, thank you very much.
When it comes.
When it comes, yes.